Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the second episode of the Sharia Scholars podcast. I'm very excited in this particular podcast to have perhaps the most senior Islamic finance scholar in the UK, none other than Mufti Barkatulla. And in this episode, we'll be discussing a question which is always asked. I receive this email almost on a weekly basis asking, how is it Sharia compliant, permissible, that in a home purchase plan, in an Islamic finance home mortgage, that the payments, costs, insurance are to be paid by the customer? And before we go to our guest, let me just introduce Mufti Barkatullah, and then we'll hand over the mic to him and just get a few words from him. Mufti Barkatullah, as I mentioned, is, mashallah, goes back to the 70s where he finished his Alimiya and Mufti program or Mufti course in Darul Uloom Deoband. He's been the Imam, a senior Imam in London for decades. Not only that, though, he's been very active in Islamic finance. He is the Sharia Supervisory Board member of Al Bank and multiple financial institutions, as well as holding several other memberships and board seats across various activities, including Sharia councils in halal food industry and other industries. So we're very, very fortunate to have him and very grateful for his time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Mufti Sahab.
Yes, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
No, you're most welcome. And this is an honor and a privilege for us, the young ones, to learn from those who've been in Islamic finance for decades now, right? You've seen the entire industry from its beginning to where it is now. So it'll be wonderful to get your insights. I guess the first thing I just want to mention for everybody is this question on insurance and other costs, which in typical home purchase plans and Islamic finance products, these costs are borne by the customer, right? When you ask the financing institutions, they'll tell you the real reasons why they do this or why practically this is the case. For instance, the customer is the primary beneficiary of the insurance product, right? They're living in that home for the long term. It's their home. In terms of the overall financing operation, they want the home. Hence, it makes sense for the customer to choose what he wants and choose the particular product he's looking for. Secondly, they will also tell you that it will help the customer seek the most competitive price. If the customer is paying, he will look for the most competitive price, and not only the most competitive price, but also the product that suits the customer, right? There may be certain facilities, certain services a customer may want or may not want. Giving the choice to the customer allows the customer to choose what's in their interest. Thirdly, and perhaps a very important one, is there's efficiency in administration. Just think about a bank which has 10,000 customers, 10,000 home purchase plans on its books. And every single year they need to renew the insurance of every single customer. Just imagine the administrative burden and lack of efficiency. Hence, it makes sense you make empower the customer to go and find a product that suits them at whatever price that suits them in whichever facilities they want, and they can go ahead. Likewise, if perchance, and this is the reality, if the bank or the financial institution was also taking part in this process, very likely they would bake that cost into their costings, and that would mean the product itself would perhaps become more expensive, right? And that would make it less competitive in the market. So just to make things streamlined, to make it easy, and to make it more efficient, it makes sense from a practical, commercial perspective and an administrative perspective for the customer to go ahead and take out insurance, being a partner in the property, and go ahead and choose what they want. So these are some of the practical reasons why your Islamic financial institutions will be giving this responsibility to the customer, and they don't want to be in the business of choosing insurance policies on a daily basis. And for instance, if there's a claim, then perhaps it's one of the major reasons, right? Imagine if there's a claim that happens, a bank or financial institution doesn't want to be, caught in between the claims process and having to deal with all of that. Rather, you let the customer deal with that. So these are some of the practical reasons. Mufti Sahab, in terms of these practical commercial and real reasons. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this particular point or particular idea?
No, I don't want to add anything, but why the question comes up that surprises me, because in conventional mortgages and other mortgages, nobody asks this. In regulated mortgages, it is by law. And here, and the home insurance is the cheapest insurance one can have around anything, basic insurance. And there used to be takaful previously, which was there. And so we have had 2 episodes of takaful being available and then going away. And then third one is in the pipeline. At the moment, some other people are trying to get it takaful. Inshallah, there will be some takaful, the mutual insurance. So I think what people do, they just read on the internet and read the classical scholars' deliberations. So they take it from there that it is responsibility of the landlord rather than tenant. Yeah. But they don't understand the duality of relationship. There is a partner relationship, and then there is a landlord and tenant relationship. And then there is a relationship of ultimate beneficiary and ultimate owner. Yeah. So there is a little bit confusion, and it's like just trying to follow the letter of the medieval or previously stated Urf, I will call it. So there is no Sharia text, and there is no Sharia requirement or such guidance in terms of this. This is all determined based on the practice, based on the Urf and law and practice of the land. So, for instance, normally the maintenance is on the landlord, but in UK all the commercial leases are completely formatted differently. So the Urf here in UK and Europe and America is completely different than other places or in the medieval ages, before industrial age. So these are some of the things which I thought will be beneficial to understand the change circumstances, change reality, and ultimate beneficiaries, and that's why if they want to do it like the other way, it will be cumbersome and difficult for both parties, and it will be like adding to the cost of the home finance, and then of course making it less competitive.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at the IOFI standards, right? The IOFI standard 18 on possession clearly mentions that the expenses of conveyancing, witnessing, preparation of instruments, all these formalities that take place with a contract, it's down to either what's stipulated in the contract or customary practice. Likewise, they mention several other transactions like your istisna, salam, and all these other muawadat and exchange contracts. Again, it's down to what's stipulated in the contract. And if there's no stipulation, then it's down to the industry practice, how it goes. And that's acceptable from a Sharia perspective. And therefore, I would agree with you, what we've exactly mentioned here, that this issue can be Sharia compliant. Any one party can bear. They're partners. Any one partner can bear the costs involved in this, right? I mean, even if somebody was to look at the classical fiqh, which you alluded to, I actually found Abu Layth as-Samarqandi, a very reputable Hanafi scholar, right? Who passed away in 373 after Hijrah. He mentions exactly what you mentioned here, that classically the fuqaha had said that the costs of maintaining a horse, maintaining a servant, meaning the maintenance costs, they're on the landlord or the owner. But he mentions that if there's an urf which is against this, then it'll be permissible based on the urf to stipulate this on the tenant or the lessee, right? Or the beneficiary. Al-Hamawi, the famous Mufti of Cairo who passes away in 1098, he wrote the Shara on Ashbab al-Nadha'ir. He mentions that you can, based on this idea, it's permissible to even condition and stipulate in the contract that the lessee will bear these costs. right? Which is against the qiyas or the muqtadha of the Aqd. Typically, what's known as in the classical fiqh. Ibn Abidin in his Hasha also mentions this and says if there's a industry practice, an urf, you can stipulate a condition accordingly. So based on IOFI standards, today's practice or gold standard for the Islamic finance industry in the world, as well as the classical fiqh, there's a clear precedent that these costs can be stipulated as is business practice, as industry, and it's down to the parties to agree on how they manage this particular cost.
So I remember 10, 15 years ago, this was under discussion in our Shariah board. And so for the sake of clarity, and we did offer that if you want to do it, you can do it. If you want to us to do it, we will do it, but we will increase the rent then, insurance rent, but if you do it yourself, it will be cost effective, practically good. So the choice was there, but I don't know what is the actual on ground practice. The choice is always there. It can be either party can do it.
I guess the biggest question that many people raise is if it's a musharakah, right, then it's all about sharing, right? So they expect everything to be shared from beginning to end. That's where this objection is coming from.
Yeah, of course, but they think that they are doing business with the financial institution. And by definition, financial institutions are not in the business of getting in partnership others. So this is like a unique concept of partnership, which is not business partnership, which is Sharikatul Amlak, mean coincidental partnership, not a business partnership for making profit out of this partnership. So there are partnership and there are partnership. So this is not purely the business partnership; it is a coincidental partnership. I don't know if I translate this Sharikatul Amlak as
it's like joint ownership in property, right? It's a very good point that you've mentioned because many people read the IOFI standard on Musharakah, right, which is number 12. They assume that to be the standard on Shirkatul Milk, whereas it's on Shirkatul Aqd. So they look at the standard 12, thinking that these are the rules to apply to Shirkatul Amlak, rather it's to do with Shirkatul Aqd, right? So for the benefit of the viewers, the Shirkatul Amlak or Shirkatul Milk just means a joint ownership in property. So two people come together, they buy something just to own and they share ownership of that particular item. Shirkatul Aqd is a business partnership where both parties entering into a partnership to earn profit, right? And there's different rules for both types of partnerships. And the home financing products that we have based on diminishing Musharakah in the UK are based on Shirkatul Milk. That changes the entire way these function. They're not functioning like businesses or like for-profit ventures. Rather, it's more about co-ownership and joint ownership. And there's much more flexibility and room in this type of partnership on how you manage it, right? I guess from a Sharia perspective, I just want to, for the benefit of the viewers, also discuss and elaborate further on how these costs in Sharia are to be borne, right? Just to make it very clear. So, for instance, in sales, if you look at the fiqh of sales, we know that the asal is whoever is responsible to do something, they typically would be responsible to pay that cost. That's why you have Quduri and other classical texts saying, وَأُجْرَةُ كَيَّالِ الثَّمَنِ or وَنَاقِدِ الثَّمَنِ عَلَى الْبَائِعِ وَأُجْرَةُ وَزَانِ الثَّمَنِ عَلَى الْمُشْتَرِي, right? So, or وَأُجْرَةُ الْكَيَّال, right? And وَنَاقِدِ الثَّمَنِ عَلَى الْبَائِعِ. That these costs, because the seller is responsible to deliver the goods, he is responsible to make sure the goods, the amount and everything is correct and hand over. Likewise, the responsibility of the buyer is to make sure he is given the correct amount. So he is responsible to make sure the amount is correct. And in those times, if they had to weigh the gold and silver, he'd be responsible for the person who weighs everything, right? And that's why the scholars mention that whoever's responsible to hand over something, they should be bearing the costs of that. If you condition otherwise, that's against the dictates of the contract and what the contract demands. If you don't condition anything and one party voluntarily agrees that they'll bear the cost, that's absolutely fine, because something that's not in the contract stipulated in that way, one partner can volunteer. The classical scholars have mentioned this. And if one partner undertakes or one party undertakes, it's not imposed upon him, but he says, look, I agree that I'll cover this from my side. He's happy with that. And he takes it upon himself. He can also bear that cost. This idea is coming from the principle al-ghurmu bil-ghunmi, right? That if you want to benefit from something, you bear the underlying cost of it, right? So that is as far as sales are concerned and how it works. Mufti, do you have anything to add on the idea of sales and costs?
You mean in terms of diminishing musharakah?
I will be discussing lease and diminishing musharakah, but just in terms of like normal trading, any other principle you want to add when it comes to bearing costs in day-to-day transactions and sales?
I mean, the overarching rule is the market practice will prevail. Urf is a very big source of these things, rather than. So if the Urf was not prevailing, then all this sale by click, mouse click would have been invalid according to the classic.
Agreed, absolutely. And that is the thing, because what the Urf is your business practice.
Yeah.
If there's no Urf and you were to stipulate something, it might have been a shart fasid, like an irregular term in the contract.
Yeah.
But the power of business practice industry is such that makes even what could potentially have been against a contract being valid, or it could have made a contract invalid. The Urf shows that the reason for invalidity no longer applies, and therefore that term then becomes permissible. Because what's the problem with these conditions? The real problem with these conditions is that it could lead to what the fuqaha call munaza'a, right? The mufdi ila al-munaza'a, which means that certain terms could lead to dispute. But how do we know if a certain term is no longer leading to dispute? Because it's become so common, right? And we know by practice that this particular clause no longer results in the hukam. The illah no longer results in the hukam, and therefore the scholars mentioned such a condition would be inconsequential, it'll be permissible to add, right? And that's why Mufti Barkatulla just mentioned is a key point, that Urf has a major role in understanding which clauses invalidate or don't invalidate. And it's very important to understand the connection. Whatever is Urf would naturally become a term of the contract implicitly. Al-ma'ruf kal-mashroot, right? That's the principle. I guess that's good to understand sales. I just want to mention about leases now in particular.
Yeah.
That in leases, like we just mentioned previously, there's Imam Muhammad rahimahullah in Al-Asl, right? The major work of the Hanafi school clearly mentions there as well that the cost of maintenance of the house and upkeep of the house is upon the landlord, as you had clearly mentioned earlier as well. And that's how the qiyas or the strict legal application of the rule would work, right? If that's normal, without any urf considerations, without any other practice. The strict legal application would be like that. Hence, in Islamic finance, you have two approaches now. You have one approach where they stipulate a service agency agreement, like we see in many HPPs and home purchase plans, where the customer becomes an agent to go and do certain works on behalf of the landlord, right? And that's netted off afterwards, right? And we will be discussing the whole service agency agreement in another podcast, going into detail what it is, how it works, and why it's there. But this is not the time for that. The second approach is the scholars are of the view that out of istihsan and urf, right, that they follow another legal precedent. And this is the idea of what Abu Layth al-Samarqandi mentioned, what I quoted earlier, where he says if something becomes dominant that the cost of maintenance is on the tenant or lessee, then out of istihsan and moving away from the strict application of the law, there's an istihsan based on urf that allows this particular rule to apply, because now it's industry norm it no longer leads to niza' or any kind of dispute between the parties. So there is a classical precedent as well in a lease to permit certain costs then to be borne by the tenant. We have a precedent for that. The fuqaha have mentioned this, Ibn Abidin has discussed this, Hamawi has discussed this, all the way going back to Abu Layth as-Samarqandi, rahimahullah. And this is, I guess, why many people have this objection in home purchase plans, whether it is permissible for customers to bear certain costs. Mufsab, anything to add from your perspective on this particular point on leases and costs?
I mean, not technically, but what I mentioned, that because of the dominant market practice of the regulated mortgages, we Sharia scholars and the industry practitioners try to mimic the conventional mortgage market, but through Islamic methodologies. Because anyway, any other mechanism will not be beneficial for customers. So, for instance, if it was pure business partnership, then loss and gain both are to be shared. But here, no customer wants to share their gain in the appreciation of the property prices. So, I mean, so what I say to the people and PhD students when they ask me that, look, this we whatever is the permissible within the Sharia, we have used it to make it as close as possible with the market and industry practice. And UK has like 100, 200 years of practice in the mortgage market. And that's why buying on mortgages and home finances is cheaper than renting here. Nowhere else in the world it is like this. This is the fact which I just mention as a side historical fact.
If somebody was to object and say, why are Islamic financial institutions wanting to mimic, as you mentioned, they're mimicking the conventional products, what would your response be to that?
Because the other options will put the customer at disadvantage. So this mimicking is to give the full advantage and the 100 years of practice here in UK in the advantage and benefit of the customer. So, for instance, the house value gain in the properties are such a huge bonuses for the customers that if the banks were to and financiers were to share that, nobody will buy the Islamic mortgage.
No, and that's a brilliant point.
That is my response.
Oh, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And then I guess the next question then is about diminishing Musharakah, right? That's the main thing, or Musharakah in general. I guess what people fail to always understand is that in a Musharakah or the Shirkatul Milk, both the customer and the financial institution are actually partners, right? It's not now, they're not counterparties, they're actually partners in that the ownership interest is shared between them of a particular property. And when you go to a Islamic financial institution, they tell you, these are our terms that we will buy a property with you. If you want, you can accept, and if you don't accept, that's absolutely fine. You're not coerced into accepting certain terms. If it doesn't suit your particular requirements or even your views, right? You may hold a particular individual view or follow a particular scholar, that's fine, but it doesn't mean then that you have to accept that product. Right? It's an open market. You can go find something else which suits you, but that's the typical approach, that they're happy to buy something with you, but on the terms that they've laid out to you. And therefore, in a shirka, as I mentioned, the asal in a shirka and this kind of joint ownership is, classically speaking, that every partner and party should pay and be responsible for their share according to their share ownership. So if somebody owns 40%, they'll be responsible for 40% of the maintenance. This is in the absence of any stipulation, any urf, right? And there's no other precedent. This is their default. That's what would happen. But as we've discussed previously, if there's a clear stipulation, as mentioned in IOFI, or an industry practice, an urf, then that urf can be applied. In addition to that, if one of the partners agrees, for instance, if Mufti Barkatulla and myself were in a partnership, and I said, look, don't worry, I'll pay for these costs, right? What's the prohibition? What's prohibited about that? If one partner says, I'll take it, I'll agree, I'll cover these expenses. Right? And I guess one point I'd like to make, and I'd love to get your thoughts on, many people associate cost and risk together. Cost and risk. They say if you are paying for this, that means the bank is no longer bearing the risk. And what I typically say to people, cost and risk are two different things, right? Bearing an expense is not the same as bearing the underlying risk. Just because me as a customer, I've paid for insurance, it doesn't mean now I'm bearing the risk of the entire property. The risk of the property will be borne when there's actual loss to the property. It's destroyed. At that time, both partners will have to bear that. Yes, the insurance will come and reinstate the property. However, that's where risk becomes manifest. And so cost and risk are two different things. Just because one partner is paying for a particular expense and cost, it doesn't mean the other partner is not bearing the risk. Anything to add to this point?
This is a good point, really.
Yeah, and it's something which always comes up, and I guess many people are always struggling with these ideas, and it just shows me there's a lot of education required on these certain points. And I guess that's why it takes me to my final point. I mean, how do we actually, and how do you envisage the Islamic finance industry to operate, and how should this improve, or what would you like to see in this particular space of costs and expenses going forward?
I thought that like the Islamic home finance started like 20 years ago. And in the beginning 5 years, in the early 5 years, these were the more questions. But as time passed and as people realize that there are various realities and various pressures and various possibilities, then the Sharia related questions diminished, and then the operational questions became dominant. But I think it is now because of the higher cost of home finance repayments, it is bouncing back. So the reasons are others, but they are wrapped in the Sharia objections and things like that. So I think people should realize that it is for the benefit of the whole society, the investors, and the participants, and the home finance purchasers. It is win-win situation rather than win and loss situation.
There's another also, like recently what's been happening is there's many different commentators, content creators. This is happening a lot now with social media and the kind of like space that we operate in. There's so many different opinions. Some people say this is not Sharia compliant, Islamic finance is all riba, or these products are not Sharia compliant at all. Is this riba really? And there's some of these, for instance, there's another objection that all the HPPs are just debt, and therefore it's a riba, right? So there's many of these types of objections happening, and I guess that's why people are asking these questions. And this is one of the reasons why I've started this Sharia Scholars podcast, to get senior Sharia scholars like yourselves and from others across the world to really explain to people in the kind of logic, Sharia principles on certain matters, even from a pragmatic, practical perspective.
So, I mean, what, all those who are initiating those discussions, they are really exposing themselves and creating confusion for themselves and others. So they are not like clarifying the situation. They are not part of the solution, but they are part of the creating skepticism and other confusion. So instead of fatwa and write-up being a tool to educate and bring people and benefit of society and individuals together, they are the people who instead of suggesting some more ideas, they just are objectioners and protesters. So only they are displaying their own confusion really, rather than any understanding of the situation.
What I
That
typically
is
tell
my
people
comment.
is, no, Jazakallah khair, and I totally agree. I mean, we need to work. I mean, there's always room for improvement, and fiqh is made of different opinions, right? It's an ongoing, evolving process. That's fine. It's in these types
Yeah.
of matters, there is no absolute right and wrong. Like there can be, is one person can be musib, and it is possible of khata, right? And there's a person who can be khati with a possibility of having isaba, right? As our fiqh tells us, right?
Yeah.
And for the viewers, that means in fiqh matters where there's a valid difference of opinion, the classical scholars would say that I feel that I'm right, but I could be wrong. Or I'm confident that I'm right, but there's a possibility I'm wrong. And I feel my counterparty or opponent is wrong. That's my view, but there's a possibility he can be right. This was the balance and moderation in our classical fuqaha and scholars, right? But today what's happening is, no,
So these are the
you are all wrong.
philosophical. These are the philosophical reconciliation which modern scholars lack really.
Yeah, and sadly what's happening now is it's the language is only we're right or I'm right and you are all wrong, right? So there's a bit of humility required as well by myself and everybody, I guess. We just need to understand that the fiqh has its flexibility and difference of opinions as long as you have a correct methodology. And also it's very important, and something which you probably definitely agree with. Nowadays, everybody has an opinion, right? On everything, which is another problem in Islamic finance as well. Many people are not qualified as ulama, as experts in Islamic finance or Sharia scholars, yet they'll have an opinion on this product, that product, this structure, or this particular mechanism, which is also a big problem, right?
Yeah, they can contribute either creating the confusion or clarifying. It is could everybody is contributing according to what they have.
Very true. And that's why faqidu shay la yuti. Right? Somebody who doesn't have anything can never give anything else.
Yeah.
I just want to end this particular podcast with yourself, just to what I typically tell people, just to make them, give them some kind of a hope or some kind of, farsightedness. I tell them that there's 3 levels in Islamic finance, right? This is how I've understood things, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Now, one is the permissible level, where we're just doing engineering, creating products to save people from riba, which is a wonderful, rewarding act. Alhamdulillah, people are being saved from riba and they can buy their assets, homes in a Sharia compliant way. This is where we are right now. Then there's a second level, which I'd call the equitable level.
Yeah.
The equitable. So that's, for instance, a shirkatul milk. We then work according to the asal and default of sharing. When the industry has matured, we can move there. When it's competitive, there's economies of scale. These financial institutions can grow. They're no longer fighting. There's excess liquidity, right? They can now maneuver and they can offer different products and different pricing, right, to the market. That's, I would say, is level 2. And level 3 is a prophetic level, which I would like to say and see one time in the future, where these financial institutions actually say to their customers, when they reach, become very dominant, don't worry, we'll cover these costs. They do ihsan, right? So it's like this 3 stages. And right now, the industry in the UK is perhaps just on level 1. And we've been on level 1 for a very long time. And perhaps even the whole Western world, we're just trying to operate within the frameworks, trying to make products that solve the immediate problem, which is saving people from riba immediately, because the entire system is riba based. But we were to create something as a starting point to save people from riba, and it may take 50 years, it may take 100 years. But we have a roadmap, we have a direction, we want to continuously grow and keep building on what we have, build on the legacy of our forefathers and scholars who've done something previously in the previous decade, build on that, add to that, and keep moving forward. What are your thoughts on these points?
There is a confusion on terminology, really. I mean, once I was confronted with a group of ulama. I said, how do you call it Islamic banking? Yeah. I mean, what they assume that word Islamic means the Sufi banking or benevolence banking or charitable work. So, like, first generation of Muhajirin from Makkah to Medina. So they think that it is a utopian society, utopianism is Islamic. So, but I say, okay, maybe this is maybe just a word terminology used for the introduction to the general public. You can call it Jaiz banking. So we are going to the limits of whatever is Jaiz. The calling it Islamic is for introductory and educational purposes. Not We are not claiming that we are ideal, as you explained, the third level. Yeah. So in many Muslim countries, there are those benevolence and other things available, not in the West, because people are still comparing it with the riba-based system, which has lots of leverage, lots of government support, legislator support. So they are comparing, oranges and bananas rather than same things. And nowadays there are those who are offering some more tweaked Islamic home finance products. They are also implying that the others are not compliant or not good enough. I mean, there is always room for improvement, and regulated and non-regulated mortgages do operate differently. They don't understand that regulation mean uh, protection of the public interest rather than just rosy terms where sometime one benefits, sometime other loses, and things like that. So we should not make it present it as my oranges are better than your oranges. Oranges are oranges. Some may have good taste, some may have average taste, but I mean, let us move on, inshallah, rather than try to claim some purer than pure.
No, Jazakallah khair. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for this wonderful advice and insights from yourself. Those of you who know Mufti Barkatullah is a very, very senior scholar, benefit from him, his knowledge. He's based in London. May Allah, reward him immensely and grant him a long, healthy life full of barakah, inshallah, and allow us to continue to benefit from him. Jazakallah khair, Mufti Sahib. It has been a pleasure to have you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi. Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum.